Good afternoon and happy Wednesday. Thank you for joining Intentional Cybersecurity and Cyber Reason for an overview of the 7,000 plus IRs later, the 11 Essential Cybersecurity Controls. My name is Jasmine Hay. I am the North America lead for cyber insurance solutions at Cyber Reason. Cyber Reason is a global company with EDR, MDR, and consulting capabilities. We specialize in helping organizations harden against, respond to, and recover from cyber incidents. Joining me today are Devin Ackerman and Shay Colson. Devin, why don't you start off by introducing yourself to the audience, please?
Hey everyone, as Jasmine introduced, my name is Devin Ackerman. I am currently the global head of digital forensics and incident response here at Cyber Reason. My background is as an incident response consultant for almost a decade now. And before that, I was a supervisory special agent with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. My focus for almost 2 decades now has been on digital forensics and incident response focused investigations. Jasmine?
Shay, why don't you introduce yourself now?
Great. Thanks, Jasmine. My name is Shay Colson. I'm a partner at Intentional Cybersecurity. We're a risk assessment and security advisory firm and a partner with Cyber Reason, and really excited to be here today to bring both sides of this coin, right? The proactive side from my side of the house and the reactive from Devin, to talk about how these controls come together to really help manage risk. And so, Jasmine, I'm ready to go. Let's do it.
Okay, great. So what are we going to be talking about today? We are going to discuss what the controls are and are not, application of the controls, pitfalls from the digital forensics and incident response perspective, and resources to help your organization with implementation of these controls. The session is being recorded and will be made available after our discussion today. We will have time for Q&A at the end, but we encourage you to drop your questions in the chat throughout the presentation, and we will do our best to answer questions as they come in. Now, before we get started, we are asking everyone in the audience to go to cyberreason.com to grab the resources you see on your screen and follow along. Devin and Shay will provide commentary on the controls, but we're not going to explore each one in depth. For your convenience, we dropped a comment in the chat with a link to the resources at cyberreason.com. Devin, I will pass this on to you now.
All right, so let's have a little bit of fun today. We are excited about this webinar in general because this has been the labor of not only intense focus and, frankly, Shay and I talking through a vast amount of controls over the many months, but it's been building to this release. It's been building to a point in time where we've been able to build upon not only what we've seen in the industry and our careers collectively, but looking at controls and trying to distill that down for users like yourselves, for law firms, for the insurance community, for clients who have a particular fixed security budget and want to understand where can I get the biggest bang for my buck, right? So we're going to work through the experience from both of our perspectives. We're going to break down these controls, and we're going to hopefully pass on some of not only the knowledge and wisdom we've gained over the years of how we can help create some noise in the network from a threat actor perspective in raising our defenses, but also allowing and sharing some of the lessons learned from years of doing this. Shay, anything to add?
I also think it's really great to be able to have both sides of this coin. You know, so often, Devin, in your world and in your practice groups, you are right of boom, right? You are post-incident, you are coming in to do incident response where it's too late. The controls, you know, the time for that has passed. On my side of the house, oftentimes, you know, clients haven't had an incident yet. They maybe haven't felt the pain. The necessity for these things isn't there yet. So these seem like a lot of work, and how much return on investment am I getting? So for us to be able to combine them together to bridge the gap between the proactive side and the reactive side in a way that is really distilled, practical, and actionable, I'm really excited about. And I think, you know, Devin, you and I are a little strange in that we get excited about cyber. Most of our clients think that's a little weird. That's okay. We can bring the excitement, and hopefully some of that trickles out today. But the goal here is to make this, again, practical, actionable, and useful, because otherwise it just feels overwhelming. And so if we can distill out those lessons, hard-earned lessons for everybody here today, and pass them on, that's great. So I'm excited. One of the things as we wrestled with this was this compliance challenge, and so I think everybody here has certainly heard of the frameworks, whether it's the NIST cybersecurity framework or the control sets like the CIS 18 controls from the Center for Internet Security, or compliance requirements like PCI or HIPAA. Those things all have their place. But one of the challenges is that it is difficult to go from a compliance-oriented program into a security-oriented program or a risk-oriented program. If you have a security-first program with robust controls, meeting compliance requirements is a much simpler endeavor. And so what we've tried to do here is not align up front on these frameworks, on these control sets, but map them in the back. There's a time and a place for all of those things, and we can get there if you go to the materials that Jasmine mentioned at the top. There are mappings for each of these 11 controls across all of the common frameworks. But what we're focused on here is the things that really move the needle for your risk, the things that help us deter, detect, and then disrupt threat actors in our systems, in our environments, and things that you can go and implement today, oftentimes without any additional cost. So starting here from this very practical security risk focused piece, backing into the compliance piece as needed, but not starting there. Devin, anything you want to add on that piece?
I'll add one quick point and we'll keep going. Many organizations lean on compliance frameworks to be a guide. It's exactly what they were designed for. And we're not saying that you should change anything in that approach. It's that the cost-effective solutions that make them compliant in Shay, your world, and in my world, what we end up finding is that organizations that have suffered incidents, intrusion paths from a threat actor perspective, they were technically compliant. It's not about, hey, I've checked the box, I'm compliant, I followed a framework, therefore I'm impenetrable. It's how do we have a baseline that raises the bar of security, but while also balances real world threat actor techniques and tactics. And that's again what we tried to do and hone in on as we created these 11 controls. Let's keep going.
Yep. And then again, to help you apply them across your organization. So I think this is a really great way to just lay out the things that the kind of core distilled 11 controls can help you do, whether it's on the left here, prioritizing your resources, right? Where do I start first? Looking at those high risk or high impact controls and bringing them down. How do I talk about this with my leadership? Oftentimes we've got to report up to the C-suite or to the board in a way that makes sense to a not overly technical audience. How do I identify gaps, right? Can I look at these 11 controls across my environment and feel confident in their deployment status? Am I able to align this with some of the other things my risk managers or insurance partners are looking for, whether it's a renewal questionnaire or a compliance piece? Can I get ready so that if something does happen from an incident perspective, I've got the logs, I've reduced the blast radius, I can, do some of these things. If you haven't been through an incident and you haven't had to call Devin and his team, at 11 p.m. on a Friday night, this can help you be ready to do that should that happen to you. And then again, to the bigger point here, how do I bridge compliance and security in a way that actually helps me move these things in a way that puts me in a better position, builds resilience, demonstrates compliance, and manages the risk? That is hard, and that's what we've tried to distill out in these 11 controls.
Perfect.
All right. So Devin and Shay, I think we teased the audience enough. How about we dive right into what the 11 essential cybersecurity controls are?
Let's do it. So I want to give everyone a moment to kind of look at these. Again, if you download the cheat sheets, you're probably already scanning ahead, and that's awesome. That's what we want. These are the controls, the 11 controls from our perspective. And we're going to review them at a high level. We only have so much time today, but we're going to work through these on the following slides. I want to touch on an initial point, though, that these controls range from product recommendations, not necessarily by brand or make or model, but generally products you can implement, such as EDR to control the telemetry type review, the black box type recording that many businesses have moved to, regardless of the vendor that you use for that. But also it balances with tabletop exercises. And look, tabletop exercises are no new thing to many within the legal community, the insurance community. Frankly, many of you within the cybersecurity teams, you know what an incident response plan is, you know what a tabletop exercise is. But where Shay and I come from and why we have this as one of the controls is because drilling and repetitiveness is what creates muscle memory. And just like in my former world in law enforcement, you don't want someone showing up at a crime scene to investigate a crime who's never done it before. That's exactly what we're trying to drill here, is that these 11 essential cybersecurity controls are about how do we create patterns of process that help raise that bar of security, which is what you will kind of see as a resounding theme as we go through this.
Great.
Jay?
Yeah, let's dive right in. So the general format here is we're going to do a little bit of discussion on each. They will all be summarized in the materials that Jasmine provided. And then please reach out with questions here at the end of this webinar. We will do our best to address those. Or after the webinar, let us know and we can set up time with either our responders or our proactive team to continue the conversation. But we're going to start here with the first control, which is phishing resistant MFA. And so I'm going to decompose this a little bit. I think a lot of folks on this call are aware of what MFA is, or multi-factor authentication. Again, a second factor beyond just your username and password. In a lot of cases, clients don't have MFA deployed everywhere for every account. So the first bar is, can we roll out MFA? Oftentimes that is a non-phish resistant version. So things like the 6-digit code you get via text message or SMS, maybe even the one-time code that expires every 30 seconds or every 60 seconds that you have to put in. Those are multi-factor, but they're not phish resistant. Phish resistant means even if you put your second factor into an attacker's system, it won't actually be allowed to be replayed and authenticate yourself. So these are things like YubiKeys, or you might see them now talked about as passkeys, WebAuthn, or FIDO2. There's some technical components, but what it really means is that even if you get phished, that second set of factors, that second code, can't be replayed to authenticate. And what this matters for is those instances where we are assuming that some of our controls will not be fully effective all the time. We're trying to build both diversity of defense and defense in-depth strategy. And this cornerstone of protecting our identities, how our users access our information systems, hinges on this ability to authenticate the known users and prevent the unknown or the malicious users from accessing those things. And so this really does reduce your risk, especially if you're using SaaS platforms, if you've got a remote workforce, if you've got a hybrid environment. The days of everybody's in the office, it's all an internal network, I can just authenticate off of AD, those are over, and we need to protect the identities the way we used to protect our edge. What do you think about this one, Devin?
I love this one, and I love why it's number one. I'll be succinct because I know we have lots of controls to go through. Phishing resistant MFA. Here's the two stats. Take a look at our 2025 H1 report on Cyber Reason's website, because you're going to see that business email compromises are our leading incident type. Threat actors love phishing. They love collecting that MFA token and replaying that to still defeat or circumvent to log in. So phishing resistant MFA, it's not just about, yes, I have an MFA solution. It's about configuring that solution, whether, doesn't matter which vendor it is, making it so exactly as Shay has just outlined, we can help raise that bar of security, defeat what the threat actors have pivoted to. Let's move on to endpoint detection response. Look, endpoint detection response, it's not just the replacement for antivirus. It is what we have as an industry sought to identify. How do I understand all of the things happening on my endpoints, my nodes, my computers, right? Whether it's an end user workstation, a server in the cloud. It doesn't matter what the thing is or the operating system is running. It matters, how do I get visibility into this box, into this system? And EDR is designed to collect telemetry, processes that are executing, binaries, programs, installed solutions, network connections. Think of it like a black box in an airplane. It's meant to identify and collect data so that we can help identify and sift through the noise. Let's keep going.
Great. Privilege access management. You might hear this called PAM. There's also a related version called PIM. But really what this is talking about is an additional layer of controls for those accounts that have elevated privileges. Think about your admins in particular, whether that's to your M365 instance or to your local machine or to RDP into your servers. Privileged access management is designed to give this extra layer of scrutiny, of authentication authentication, of validation to those accounts that have more capability, and with good reason. Devin, I'm sure you are not short of stories where a threat actor comes in, uses a tool, compromises an admin account, and then can run wild through the environment. There are lots of ways to implement this, especially in modern cloud service providers. It is baked into a lot of them. It does add friction, so a lot of people are resistant to use it because I have to re-authenticate every time I want to run as an admin, but you're also preventing the threat actor from running with that admin account. So, Devin, from the investigation side, I'd be curious to see how you see this deployment either really help mitigate the risk, or boy, it really would have been great if you had PAM rolled out in this instance.
So I have come to expect or suspect that most organizations are not quite there yet with true privileged access management, and that's okay. But here's a huge benefit that your incident response team is going to thank you. Assume at some point there's going to be a compromise of credentials, there's going to be a compromise of a privileged account. A properly implemented PAM solution, whoever the vendor is, also creates a clear trail of that privileged account's activity. And now look, from a forensics science perspective, we're going to be looking at logs. We're going to be looking at auditable events and records laid down to your server operating systems. But the PAM solution also creates another layer of monitoring and logging, which helps fill in the picture, helps fill in the timeline. So yes, it is not only from a security standpoint, it's from an investigator standpoint, because there's also times when you have an account that's just acting suspicious. It could be a service account, it could be some other type of admin account. You want to be able to create that audit trail. This is one of the best ways to do it.
Yep. And then I think that pivots us nicely into number 4 here, which is a centralized logging and log retention solution like a SIEM. Some people say SIEM, potato, tomato, whatever. But I think the goal here is just like Devin said, do we have somewhere that we're both aggregating and retaining our logs? So many of our clients, both on the proactive side and the incident response side, have logs, except they're stored locally on that server, on that firewall. And either the threat actor has wiped the device, or it has been too long and those have been overwritten and now the forensic evidence is gone. The centralized repository lets us do a couple of things. One, aggregate and retain for investigative purposes. But the other thing it lets us do is correlate across, right? If I see something happen on the edge, then I see something happen on AD, then I see something happen on this server, I can track across that. And you also get this benefit of being able to move more quickly as an enterprise. It used to be that we would see threat actors with long dwell times, right? They'd hang out in your network for 12 or 18 months. That has shifted with the rise of ransomware to now their goal is to exfiltrate data and ransom systems as fast as possible. So you will not be able to go back and retrench what happened if you aren't capturing these things in near real time. And having a SIEM that's deployed, that's robust, that has immutable records, that you can look back at the last 6 months, that's Devin's favorite thing to walk into when he comes into an investigation.
I'm going to hit that nail right on the head with a big hammer. Most often when we're moving into an incident response, reactionary, hey, we have a client coming to us, a law firm coming to us representing a client, insurance carrier saying we have an insured, we have a client who's suffering that right of boom incident already. Logs are a layer, foundational layer from a forensics review perspective, right? And so let's just talk super high level. Perimeter. The threat actor had to come through the perimeter, the outside shell of an organization, somehow, some way, whether that shell is in the cloud or it's a physical building. They had to get from the outside in, unless you're talking about insider threats. That's a whole nother conversation. So if they pass through the outer shell, they pass through the perimeter, they probably pass through a firewall VPN, some type of external appliance, a server that's sitting there at the perimeter. All of that logging of that traffic is one of the very first things we want, right? Think of it like a path, an intrusion path, a path of intrusion from start to end. They started somewhere. That's the piece that I want to be able to answer, right? Sometimes we're working backwards to it. Sometimes we're starting with that. Firewall logs, VPN logs. It is amazing how often those logs only live on the appliance. And that shelf life is minutes, hours, maybe days if you're lucky. So this type of solution is fantastic. Again, please continue adding the questions into the channel. We'd love to take those as we're going along here. And look at that, we've got one. So real quick, So, Shay, I want also your opinion on this.
Yep.
Best practices are not necessarily the perfect way to kind of look at this lens. Regulated industries, from healthcare to government, like clear to defense contractors, you have best practices. But at the end of the day, the more logs we have to go back in time and tell a story, but also understand context and baseline, that's what I'm looking at it from a forensics perspective. And that's a balance with business needs, finances, as far as the budget, but best practices more is better when it comes to logging, in my humble perspective. Shay?
Yeah, I would say operationally, if you can aim for 6 months, right, 180 days, that's really good. That would also mean you've got to understand all your log sources, get them all fed in, aggregated, all of that stuff. Practically, 6 months is great. I think there's some regulatory obligations that are longer. New York DFS requires 5 years of log retention for certain transactions. Those don't have to be necessarily live and hot in your SIM. You could do archived or cold or long-term storage for those as long as you can bring them back. If you've got, from an operational perspective, 6 months of logs, I think you're doing better than most.
Yeah. Let's keep going.
Also, that question thing in this live platform is really slick. I like that. Okay, keep them coming. These two fall into this category of easier said than done. So on the left, let's do regular patching and vulnerability management first. These are two different things that are tightly coupled and related. So I think we all understand what regular patching is, right? We apply those updates. You see them on your operating systems. You see them on your phone. You see them kind of left and right of wherever you are. But the challenge here is to do this at scale at your organization and across all of your devices. What we continually see is that an organization will roll out a tool that will help them patch, right? An RMM, or remote management and monitoring tool. It will help automate some things, except for those servers that they don't want to do on the automated piece because it impacts the business and they have to schedule the downtime. And then all of a sudden, those are the ones that are involved in the incident. So I think having a regular patching cadence, automated if you can, that encompasses everything, not just the operating systems, but also those third-party packages on, like, Adobe is a classic example. Firefox and Chrome have had 0 days this year. Those are good ones. Also, in your software development lifecycle, if you are writing code, making sure those libraries and those binaries are updated. Easier said than done, but very important. And then vulnerability management gives you a sense of understanding what vulnerabilities are there, both an external scan, right? So to Devin's point, the outside of the organization, the public-facing side, and then an internal scan. So often we see just an external scan and they say, oh, well, it looks pretty good. Internally, there's lots of vulnerabilities, which means that if the attacker gets a foothold, they're going to have a field day with all of that. And so this is hard to do. It is hard to scale, but it is so critically important to close off those easy pathways for exploitation.
You said it phenomenally. The only thing I want to add here is that there should also be a scale, and this speaks to a little bit of maturity of IT security programs, but there should be a scale of patch timelines. We absolutely understand, and we submit humbly that the organizations that are large, multinational, that's complex for patch management. And there is no single size fits all type solution. But when you have a vulnerability that affects a perimeter appliance, that someone could read the vulnerability, create an actionable exploit for in very near real time, and then instantly find something very quickly, even like with a Shodan type website resource, that should be the highest priority. And that comes down to the CVSS scoring system, but also for the potential time for exploit. And so you will always have patches on the inside of the environment. Phone apps is a good example. That's not a, am I vulnerable right now? That's a, we have time, we can build that in, we can test it, make sure the patch doesn't break. But for those types of perimeter type vulnerabilities, SharePoint servers facing the internet, the firewall or VPN that has a 9.9, 9.8 vulnerability released, build into the process how to identify it. And I don't want to spoil our seventh control, but how to identify it, quickly patch it, because you want to minimize that timeline for the threat actor to exploit a vulnerability. Okay.
Yep. All right, let's move on to number 6 here around email security. Email is amazing. It's frankly a miracle that it still works. This is a technology rolled out really in the 60s with DARPANET and ARPANET. And so it is geared to deliver mail, right? It is not geared to be secure. And when you go to M365, it's optimized for functionality. It is not optimized for security. So there are some additional steps we need to take to both prevent those malicious messages from reaching our users, and then also be able to detect when they do and take action. So from a hardening perspective, make sure you have configured your email tenant, whether it's Google Workspace or Microsoft 365, for those best practices. Go find those CIS benchmarks, apply them in your tenant, and make sure that you have done the things that don't cost you any money, that are just configuration changes. The next step is to add an additional layer of protection beyond what Microsoft offers by default. That might be an E3 or an E5 license upgrade, which again, there's cost implications across your user base, but it builds those protections in. And then the next level is a secure email gateway that sits in front of or next to your email filters. Legacy ones would sit in front, filter the messages first, then pass them to M365. The more modern implementations leverage the Graph API and sit essentially alongside the Microsoft 365 capabilities and allow you to see in real time or near real time what's going on in your email environments and prevent those things from happening. But we know that bad guys send these emails. They're very low cost to no cost. They're getting very good at tailoring them with AI, using ways to subvert these scanning mechanisms, these sandboxing mechanisms, and get those malicious messages to users. And the challenge is now we all live in a world where when we get in an email, every little device on my desk makes a noise. And I'm going to check that thing, and if it's an action that I need to take, I'm going to take it. We have maybe 10 seconds before our users act on that email. So the time horizon here has shrunk tremendously to the point where we need to be ahead of those. We need to filter them before they get to our users. And then we need the ability to go through and say, who else got this email? Who actioned it? Can I remove it from the inboxes from those who haven't read it yet and prevent those things from happening? This is an unglamorous but critically important attack surface that you need to be managing. Devin?
I have nothing to add. I think that was perfectly said. Let's move on. Let's keep going.
All right. You want to start with asset inventory here, and I'll do some color when you're done?
Absolutely. So I gave a brief preview on the last slide to number 7. If logs are something that from a forensics and incident response perspective, we're going to need to help tell a story of how an incident happened, asset inventory is right there with it. 20 plus years of doing investigations, probably like many of you listening to this webinar today, and like many others in the incident response and the digital forensics communities. Asset inventory is one of the largest aspects of modern enterprises where I have yet to see a fully intact, up-to-date asset inventory. And no, dumping a list of hosts out of an EDR or dumping a list of hosts out of your RMM tool is not quite what I'm referring to here, because it doesn't necessarily include edge appliances, cloud resources, that IT network that was built for demoing a tool that didn't follow all the normal onboarding processes. I just worked an investigation recently in which we not only found 13 different shadow IT networks within the large corpus of the enterprise, we also found 4 different cloud environments set up by different business units that never went through the proper onboarding process. This is just the nature of visibility in our modern environments. It's no longer a fixed on-prem physical network inside of a building where you see the cords running everywhere. We're well past that. We're years past that. Everything is about how do I potentially move resources and traditional IT equipment into the cloud, into someone else's network. Asset inventory here into the aspects, the vulnerabilities, think about it like that. The vulnerabilities of your environment are every single place where either data flows through or you store data. And this one, I cannot hammer this one enough, because it is all too often in an incident response perspective, we are asking a client, what is this IP address? What is this host name? And sometimes our clients are not fully aware even of the full depth and breadth of their enterprise, which is what threat actors love. They love hiding in the proverbial closed corners, and they love hiding in the systems that they know are outside of the traditional monitoring or broadness of visibility. Shay?
Yep. I would just add that the challenges around this are such that you see either of the major frameworks, whether it's the CIS controls or the NIST CSF, the very first one is an asset inventory of hardware. and then an asset inventory of software, because you can't control, you can't secure what you can't see. And so understanding your environment and what you're running in there is critical. I think often software inventory gets left behind on this, and that becomes super useful when something like Log4j happens and you have to go and see, hey, do I have an affected version of a product that uses that tool in my environment so I can prioritize patching? If you don't have an inventory list to start with, you're in for a very long stretch. I would also say in the OT environment, when we've got, machines on the floor that are not Windows laptops, that makes this an extra challenge. And now, not only with the cloud, but to Devin's point, but when we're doing infrastructure as code, when we're running things in containers, when we're spinning up and spinning down resources dynamically based on loads or based on business needs, that makes it all the more both difficult and important to understand what you have, where it is, and what versions of whatever software it's running, so that you can keep an eye on that and reference it if you need it. You cannot build this list once an incident has begun. It is too late, and you're too far behind to make it worth it. Get ahead of this one. Moving across here to network segmentation and access controls. This one is really, again, in that category of unglamorous, but so important. So just at a high level, network segmentation is literally that, creating segmented parts of your network. You might hear these called VLANs, or virtual local area networks, that limit the traffic that can flow from one to the other. Access controls can both do that limitation through an ACL or an access control list, or you can have access controls deployed across the top of them. Essentially, this is saying, okay, computers on this side, you can only talk to the certain amount of computers on this side, only this computer to that computer, only this port and protocol. And what you want to do is limit it to the things you need to communicate. And if you don't need that communication, everything else gets dropped between them. Essentially, you're playing traffic cop here and saying, okay, the road only goes from here to here. It goes in this direction and it goes on this protocol. That's it. Otherwise, what we do is we leave open the opportunity for threat actors to have one computer talk to the other computer, use a different protocol, move traffic the other direction. And if you don't put these controls in place proactively, you're essentially giving them all 65,000 and change ports that we can use to go back and forth across traffic. Or when you talk about lateral movement, which I'm sure Devin's going to tell you some stories about in about 5 seconds, this is what they mean. Putting those segmentations and those access control lists in place limits their ability to move laterally across your network, and that is what helps minimize incidents when they do happen. Devin?
Perfectly stated and summarized on this control. I want to give one very brief war story to drill this really home. I had an investigation recently in which the network, while complex and diverse, involved a large amount of training environments. And in those training environments, there was an initial theory by the client, hey, everything should be domain joined so that we can monitor credentials, so that we can monitor and manage, so that we can push patches, and totally get it from an organizational perspective. In this particular intrusion, threat actor, of course, because of the ability for them to hit a primary domain controller and pull credentials, they had very broad access once they got access to service accounts. There is no perfect answer here. Our goal in this control, though, is highlighting the fact that in our modern, more complex networks, even our basic small business networks, there is absolutely a point in time to say, from an IT perspective, hey, it's working. Now, how do we now start creating layers of segmentation as we grow and evolve this environment? Because John or Jane Doe in one particular part of the business does not necessarily need access to John or Jane Doe in another part of the business. And that right there starts to evolve. It starts to drive the conversation of what we have done in information technology, in building and engineering networks for the past 2 decades is not necessarily what we should be doing today. And if we're looking at it from a threat actor perspective, threat actor loves it when they can open one door and have access to everything. Let's figure out how to create the doors, implement the perspectives within the environment so that we can start to minimize, and yes, create some barriers to accessing data. I love it when I see a client who's implemented MFA solutions for even logging into internal servers. MFA is not just for the perimeter. I love it when I see it internally as well. Shay?
Yeah. No, just to the comment here that's on screen. I think when you look at segmentation, you're building these networks to enable a certain business function, right? If I need server on this side to talk to clients on that side, that's what I want to do. They need to hit the database. That's fine, right? If that's why we're building it, great. Let's open up 3306 or whatever the database is and it can go across. If you don't need it, don't allow it. If it does not enable a business process for you, do not enable it, because those are the sort of things that end up getting both forgotten about and then misused by a threat actor, whether intentionally or internally, because something just needs to work and I'll just route it this way, and all of a sudden we've created a data flow that isn't on our maps and presents challenges. So again, I think knowing what you're trying to achieve with technology and then only enabling that is the way to do it.
I'll add one more piece to this as a
Yeah.
real life example. I think many on this today's presentation will probably be aware of the recent exploit related to Oracle and some of the infrastructure related there, which Oracle is extremely fast in creating a patch for and addressing. But one of the things the threat actors have done in that, the CLOP group specifically, is they identified a lot of the cloud solutions hosting this particular vulnerable software. In a lot of the investigations we have looked at, perimeter, traffic coming in, fully blocked. Traffic going out, wide open. No alerting from a Linux-based system to be able to open a shell and send data out. No alerting, potentially no monitoring. At the end of the day, the threat actor used an exploit, got in, and then had no barriers in getting the data out. Another just really to drive this home. Segmentation, but also access controls. And yes, to the question just posed, it is about moving more towards that lesser controlled methodology in how we protect data and the data flows.
Yep. All right, let's go to the next one here because it's a three-fer. We'll spend a little bit of time on this slide because we've got one more control than the others. But to the point on the left here, number 9, incident response plans and tabletop exercises. You know, Devin mentioned this concept at the top with this notion of muscle memory. I think this is really true for institutions, for organizations as well. Having an incident response plan that you have written down, that you know where it is, that you can reference when something happens is critically important. But if you haven't tested that, if you haven't run through it, if it doesn't have the level of depth, the level of specificity, the number of your attorney or your insurance company in there, those are the things that you're really going to need. I would also say have at least one paper copy around. I know it's hard to keep the versions up to date. I know it's, you know, people want to go paperless, all of those things. But if you can't access SharePoint where this plan lives, it's not going to do you very much good. And then to the testing part, actually test the plan. If you have the time to get the people in the room and do a tabletop, don't just make this a hand wavy exercise. Create a scenario or work with a consultant to create a scenario that actually puts the plan to a test. We did one earlier this spring with a client where the general counsel is the person in charge of running the IR. Great, makes a lot of sense. We created a scenario for them and it started with calling the help desk. We asked him to call the help desk. He didn't have the number. Okay, go grab the plan. Got the plan. The plan didn't have the help desk number on it, right? So we are sitting there in a room with all of the executives of the firm. It was a tough start, but we learned a lot, and now their plan is much more actionable. If your plan has technical procedures in it, could you run those without the person who wrote it? If that person is out sick, on a plane, you know, otherwise unavailable, can another engineer in your firm run the plan if they have just sufficient permissions? These are the things you want to aim for when you look to mature your plan. But first, create an incident response plan, run it through at a tabletop level, then refine it. And if you ever have to use it in real life, these after action reports or lessons learned that you can feed back into the plan are very important. So as you go through, or you're working with Devin's team over a weekend to battle back the threat actors, make some notes about what you wish you had in that plan, because that will make the plan all the more effective. Devin, I'm sure you've got plenty of stories to tell here. Can you give us one that's really impactful?
I love it when tabletops are uncomfortable. And here's what I mean by this. The tabletop is not meant to be an exercise in which everyone knows the answers and in which everyone is like, I just need to get through this so I can get back to my normal job. The tabletop is meant to be uncomfortable. It's meant to actually ask questions, probative questions, and identify issues, right? Whether legal is leading the tabletop, an incident response team like ours, someone proactively like Shay, whoever's leading it, it's not about just going through a script or looking at slides. It's about asking questions and truly exploring, does the CEO, does the board understand that John or Jane Doe sitting in IT, they see things very differently? That's the goal of a tabletop, to normalize the relationships in the room and raise concerns and also balance all of the perspectives of the external communications that will happen when there's an incident. So I love tabletops when they are both broken down between the IT team and the executive team, but they should bring those teams together at some point during the tabletop, because the perspectives matter in an incident. They absolutely matter during the drilling part in the preparatory phase. Shay?
Yep, great. All right, let's move to number 10 here, data classification and structured data management. There's a couple of things to really focus on here. One, when we talk about data classification, we're trying to understand what type of data do you have, particularly if it's regulated data, right? Whether that's regulated by PCI, regulated by HIPAA, regulated by another entity, or privacy impacted data, whether that's CCPA or GDPR. The acronyms are everywhere. It's your job to understand not only what you have, but where that data lives. And I think the challenge here is data sprawl is rapid. It is so easy to have data everywhere, to have it in SharePoint, to have it in an AI platform, to have it in a database, to have it in all three places. Your challenge is to figure out, what do I have? Where is it? How does it flow through my organization? And then how do I apply security controls to that are commensurate to the risk or the obligation from a regulatory perspective that that data presents? So often we see folks say, well, we don't have any, EPHI, right? Electronic Protected Health Information, except for that one where we signed the BAA. And actually, I think we do have that thing here. And oh, by the way, that's incorporated in this incident we're having. And now we've got a whole other thread of things that we need to pull. It also helps us prioritize our security spend and our security efforts. If we only have a couple of systems that handle regulated or sensitive or confidential, whatever that is for us, data, we can make sure those controls are commensurate. If a lot of our stuff is public data or data that really doesn't have that same impact, if it were lost from a confidentiality, integrity, or availability perspective, great, let's prioritize those pieces that we can. And then also it helps us plan strategically the flow of both controls and systems as we continue to evolve, as we add AI solutions, as we move into the cloud. Be mindful of how that data flows, because once it's out, it's gone forever and you can't get it back. So your only hope here is to manage it proactively, to manage it with a level of intention, and to understand how your organization moves it through the life cycle, including destroying that data when you're done with it.
So I'm going to attack this one, number 10, from a little bit of a different perspective, from the user perspective, and structured data management, right? Classifying data, putting in some type of data loss prevention system, all good things. I want to focus on the management of data and really hone in on the fact that this one ties into a lot of our prior controls we've already talked through today. Knowing where the data is, the types of data and environment, is not just a job for legal. It's not just a job for the risk manager. It's not just a job for someone in IT. It's everyone's job, even to the intern. My point here is that the management, the use, the storage, the viewing, the access of data is every employee's job. And I do believe we can all be better at educating and guiding our employees within our organizations that data management, the accessing to it, you should, if you see something wrong, you should raise that, but you should also know who to raise that concern to. If you're copying data down to work off your computer, your desktop, because it's easier, but now you're breaking kind of the controls put in place to safeguard that data, it's not about slapping the hand of the person saying, don't do that. It's, why are we doing it this way? How do we come up with a better process? Maybe we need to evolve the solution so we can stay within policy, but also train the user. There is a better way to do this, because if the data is compromised, we've created a problem. So structured data management, understanding where the data is, but also training our users, the users of our platforms, the users of our network, employees maybe with no IT background, no security background, how and what they're doing and how it affects the flow of information within our businesses.
Great. All right, last control, and then we're going to shift to questions here. Offline, segmented, and tested backups with RTO validation. So let's work through each of these pieces. I think we can all understand what a backup is and why it might be important, but there are some things that we're going to need to be mindful of if we're really going to get the value of that backup. The first is that it is offline and segmented. We often see threat actors encrypting backups as well when they're in an environment, if they're on the network drive or if they automatically flow down from whatever data source they're backing up so that they can extract their ransom. Threat actors are very good at finding these and they're very good at encrypting them. So for you, having an offline segmented air-gapped, call it what you want, version of that backup that cannot be rolled down and corrupted is what's going to let you restore from that when it's time. That's the next piece, tested backup. If you get a green dot in your Veeam console, that's good, but have you actually tested that backup? Do you have an environment where you can rehydrate it? Is it a whole bunch of servers? Is it things where we need to sequence them such that I bring up the domain controller first, then I bring up the host, then I bring up my VMs? These are important steps to test, not only to make sure the backups work, but to make sure your team knows what to do. And then from an RTO validation perspective, can you do it in the amount of time that your business needs to get that data back? If you really need that data back in 12 hours, but it takes you 4 days to spin it up, that's not going to help you when the chips are down. So again, these are all the things that are tactical and practical in terms of getting back on your feet when something happens. Maybe it's a threat actor, maybe it's an Azure outage, maybe it's a cut fiber line down the street from the construction project, maybe it's a hurricane or an earthquake, maybe it's a deletion or a hardware failure. None of the reasons matter if you've got tested, segmented, validated backups that you know you can bring up within the window. And if you don't, this is a really easy thing that's totally within your control, right? You can back it up, you can create the times, you can run the tests, and then you know that when the chips are down, you can do it. Devin, any good backup stories to share here?
I think to drive this one home, we want to frame that conversation, building upon what you just laid out, as backups are a many decade old solution to how do I restore from a hard drive that has failed, right? And backups really haven't evolved that much from an industry implementation perspective. We still, I think, I think the industry looks at backups as, if my primary breaks, how do I get to the backup so I can get my data? That's not what threat actors are doing, though. We're not dealing necessarily in the percentage of incident response engagements. We're not dealing with a failed hard drive, a failed storage array, a SAN, wherever your data is. We're dealing with a threat actor who figured out how to get to the data as a user, as an admin, as a service account. They're accessing the data in the way you created it. You engineered it to work. That's not what backups were originally designed to prevent or protect against. So this is just like how we started our controls with MFA, raising the bar of security and evolving a control, an access control, and helping to defend against modern threats. So backups, the offline aspect, the segmentation, the immutability of them, it's because we want to address how threat actors, modern threat actors, are attacking the backups. They're not causing the hard drives to fail. They're encrypting the data or they're deleting your data. How do we then raise that bar for backups to prevent or resist against a type of an attack? Shay, you want to take the question?
Yeah, I think that this comes back to some of the other controls we've talked around prioritization, right? So when we look at data classification and structured data management, or we look at our incident response plans, if you're doing business impact analysis, if you have a prioritization, that is how you can start to drive what we back up, what gets hot storage, what gets cold storage, what I need in the cloud, what I can have, in a box in the server room in the back that I just rotate, what I can have at a tape at Iron Mountain. This is all just stratifying what you need to serve that business purpose and how much you're willing to invest to drive that resilience. And maybe hot makes sense for some systems. Others, you want it warm. Others, you can have it cold. I think being able to tailor your deployment based on what your stakeholders internally need helps justify that cost, or the business can weigh out the risk and say, you know what? It's just not worth paying for that level of backup. I'm going to accept the risk. And then if something happens, that was a decision that they made. It's not a failure of your technology leadership.
And And I'll add something else. I love the question because I also think this is another good example of you don't just have to have the backup solution that is universally deployed with the exact same tiering or policies. I love seeing clients who have looked at multiple backup solutions and multiple backup policies. You have critical servers, you have non-critical servers, you have development, you have QA, you have production, you have end user workstations. One backup solution should not be equally applied to all of those. The second piece I'll make here is there should be a financial aspect to this. IT will argue for X. Risk will argue for Y. Incident response, I want as much data as I can possibly get my hands on. So I want you to back up everything. The board, the executive team, the CFO will understand numbers. If you go down due to a lack of proper implementation of control number 11, what is the lost revenue on a per day, per hour, per week basis that you are down? Use some type of financial evaluation of those dollars, those cents, to help build into the project roadmap, into the budget to balance that. This is not a one person answers the question. This is, hey, business, as we grow and we evolve from the CFO to the CEO to the board to the investors, how do we balance this against revenue? That, to the question that was just posed, thank you for that, is how I think you build the budget for this.
Yeah, sounds like we're getting some questions, Jasmine. I don't know if any others have come in, but it'd be a great time to answer some.
Okay, great. So thank you both for the overview. That was awesome. So let's talk quickly about the role of humans in cyber defenses. Is it really true that humans are the weakest link in defenses? And if so, how do we better prepare them?
I'm sure Devin and I both have perspectives on this. I would say a couple of things. One is that, yes, the humans are harder to secure than the computers, right? We're squishy, we're not rational, we're all different. I would encourage us to think about it as what can I encourage my humans to do to bolster my security rather than seeing them as something I need to secure around. So on the one hand, Devin made this point of how do you raise your hand if you see data being used in a way that it is a violation of policy or that creates risk? How do we create a culture where someone feels okay raising their hand when they click on a phishing email or when they, get a weird message on their machine, that we surface that, we encourage that, we don't punish that so that we can respond to it, whether that's a policy change, whether that's rolling IR, whatever it might be. So I think the opportunity here is how do we see our humans as an asset? At the same time, be realistic about not only insider threat, which Devin also mentioned, but these ideas of least privilege so that if something does go sideways, we've put some technical backstops in to limit the impact. Everything in security is a trade-off, but I think if you see humans as the problem, you're going to have a very hard time driving a culture of security across an enterprise.
I'll build upon that because I think it was succinctly but also wonderfully stated. To the question posed here, we recognize that humans are going to make a mistake. I make mistakes, right? We all make mistakes. What I love seeing what a business does when a business does something well is they take a mistake by an end user, not for naming and shaming. That's not the right approach. For building a culture that will help recognize how not to make that mistake. It's the same thing we do with our children. We use a mistake as a point in time to teach. And to really drill this home, it is not the IT or IT security's sole purpose to make everyone else secure. They are part of the business. They are part of the solution. You're going to use their expertise to drive home how to build a secure and robust enterprise. But to this exact question, humans are part of that. The second piece I'll add to this, I love seeing whether it's someone like Shay or I are invited to like an all employees conference where you bring an external voice in who does what we do every day. Your internal company absolutely should be bringing, hey, we had this type of a phishing attack. This is what it looked like. This is what it did. The goal is not to make everyone a cybersecurity engineer. This is the outcome of the email you may or may not have clicked or may not have gotten. This is actually what happens. Users, in my experience, love that education. To my prior point, bringing someone like us in We love war stories. We love sharing what we've learned, and we can teach through example. At an all-employee conference, even building upon something where a broader audience beyond just the tabletop, where it's usually just 10 to 15 people, like the executives in the IT, bring us in to actually talk to the entire broad employee base, because we can show examples of threat actors, these controls, and show again by example.
Those were great responses, and it really all tees up to the fact that every employee is responsible for protecting the cybersecurity of the
Yeah.
organization and the information that it holds. So thank you for that. Another question that we have in the chat. So let's talk about zero trust for a little bit. Where does zero trust fit in with the 11 controls?
Yeah, good question. I think at a high level, the reality of zero trust is twofold. One is it is a great thing to aspire to. But two, most organizations have other things they need to be working on before they move to a zero trust model. I think, this is a lot like discussions I see around post-quantum encryption. Is there value in that? Is that something that we should be thinking about? Yes. But the majority of us have other things we need to be doing first rather than rolling out zero trust or post-quantum encryption. A lot of clients don't even understand what the concept is. And I've had to explain it to leadership in multiple different ways, but the easiest way is it's like if you go to a bar to get a drink. The guy at the door is going to check your ID and make sure you're of age. Then you go up to the bar, the bartender is going to check your ID, and you say, well, he just checked it, but I haven't checked it, so I'm going to check it. Then you get your drink, you come back to get your friend a drink to get your second drink, and the bartender is going to check your ID, and you say, well, I was just here, I just got a drink. He said, I don't care, I have to check it every time. That's zero trust. But that also means you've got to figure out where those gates are. You're adding friction and overhead to your normal business processes. And do you understand where those are and what the implications are? So I think zero trust has some really good principles. Implementing it in practice takes significant resource allocation, and it's probably not the most important thing to be focused on unless you're very mature or you're implementing it in a very kind of narrow scope where lots of automation, lots of integration, lots of kind of cloud first, cloud only rollouts that can scale. Otherwise, I think the other 11 controls should be dialed 100% before you move to zero trust. I don't know, Devin, what do you think?
100% I agree. Look, it is an aspiration. It is absolutely something that we should be aspiring to, as you have so eloquently worded it. I'll add one additional piece. You can have zero trust in a segmented area of the environment where the data that you need to protect. I see this in medical research labs. They absolutely put layered controls around the intellectual property, the research data that is the keys to the kingdom for how their business makes money. I've seen this in clear defense contractor and in government space where they frankly need to have that zero trust. That's fine. Broadly across the entire enterprise, if they're not even managing and securing and patch managing, as we talked about some of our controls, zero trust here doesn't matter because we have other gaping holes. The other point I want to make on this with zero trust is from a perspective of the safeguards, from a perspective of reality. If you make something too complex, your end users will grow frustrated and they will find out ways around it. Now, you may say, well, in purity of zero trust, they can't do that. Let's put that aside for a second. Users are inventive. If I can't use the work system to do it, what's stopping me from going to the personal device? Because I have a job to do, right? In John or Jane Doe employee's mind, if it's too hard to do with the preferred approved method, I will find another way to do it. That's what we have to balance. That's what we need to help control.
Great. Well, Devin and Shay, thank you so much for educating us all on the 11 essential controls. And we do appreciate everyone that took time out of their day to join us. I will just quickly challenge everyone in the audience today to go to cyberreason.com and download our crossword puzzle on the 11 essential controls. I did use my cheat sheet to complete the puzzle, and you should keep that handy when you're going through it. So as we mentioned before, a recording of this session will be made available shortly. In the meantime, if you have any questions or need additional support, please reach out to us at response@cyberreason.com. Thank you and have a great day.